All right. So, Matt, you remember several decades ago, NASA sent out this satellite probe thing that had the drawing of humans on it that were nude, and they were trying to give like this description of what humans looked like and naked for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Well, next month they're planning on sending another one out to say sorry for all that, and they're calling it Apollo G. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Graveyard. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Adam.
And my name's Matt.
Now, pull up a tombstone or settle into your casket and get comfortable, because this is Graveyard Tales. All right, everybody, here we are again. Matt, how you doing tonight, brother?
I'm doing good.
Good. So before we get into it, I want to say go check out the Podbelly Network at podbelly.com. You can find a list of shows that we're happy to be associated with, and you can find some tips and tricks on podcasting if you're into such things. While you're on the internet, looking up our sponsors, as we always say, go check out our sponsors. Buy something, use our URL that we put in the description. But while you're on there doing that, go over to patreon.com/graveyardtales and sign up to become a patron. We've got several different levels, and we've got ways that you can get ad-free audio and video versions of the show. Everybody gets a bonus episode a week, and our $10 a month patrons, they get the new show that we've started, Side Quest, which is a totally different look at Matt and I. It's us in a whole nother realm that you haven't heard before.
Yeah, another realm. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
So it's interesting. Matt and I are really enjoying it, getting to do things that we don't normally get to do on Graveyard Tales, even on our Patreon episodes. So go over there and check it out, patreon.com/graveyardtales. Now, Matt, I'm super excited about this episode. It's been a long time coming. We have been wanting to do this for a while. So why don't you tell us, what are we talking about tonight, brother?
All right. So tonight we have a special guest we're going to talk to. He's somebody who's been in the podcast industry for a really long time. He's pushing 20 years and in an industry that when it started, nobody knew what you meant when you said, record a podcast.
Yeah. Right.
Now everybody and their brothers got one. But when our guest started, it was a brand new medium, and he stuck with it and been extremely successful. Tonight we're going to talk to JimHarold.
Yes, sir.
And JimHarold's Campfire, the Paranormal Podcast. I mean, they are iconic at this point.
Right.
He's been looking into this stuff for so long. He's talked to so many people about everything from UFOs to ghosts, cryptids, you name it. Jim has discussed it on his show before any of us, even thought about hosting a podcast. So,
right.
He's got a new book out. We're gonna talk about that and talk about some other spooky stuff. So this should be a lot of fun.
Yep, I'm looking forward to it. All right, everybody. So we're here with JimHarold. Jim, thank you for joining us tonight in the Graveyard. We really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And I was just looking at all your cool stuff in your background and stuff, and I love it. And I love to, in my background, I love to switch around different stuff. So that's really a fun, aspect of it all. It just kind of keeps it fresh and fun. And I'm glad to be here and talk to you about spooky stuff.
Yeah. That, talking about the background, that right there is our Skull Mike logo, and my stepbrother actually 3D printed that for us.
Oh, that is awesome. I like it.
The second year we were going, he 3D printed that, didn't even tell me. And my dad and stepmom gave it to me. I'm like, oh, awesome. So that has a permanent place behind me there. So
Love it. I love it.
now, Jim, you have been in the podcasting game for a long time. I remember listening to you before Matt and I started Graveyard Tales. Exactly how long have you been doing this? And I know you've got a bunch of shows. How many shows do you have now?
Well, I don't even off the top of my head. Like if you include my Plus Club and something, it's like 7 or 8 different podcasts. But my main 2 podcasts are the Paranormal Podcast and JimHarold's Campfire, which Campfire is probably my most popular show.
Yeah.
But the Paranormal Podcast started back in 2005, July of 2005. And as far as I know, it is the longest running paranormal podcast on the internet. Now, I'm willing to be corrected, and I know Darkness Radio came in right behind me within a couple of months with Dave and Tim. But I was just talking to Tim today and talked to Dave the other day with Paranormal 60, and we were joking about, he said, it just got in under the wire there right before you. But and those guys do a great job on their shows and did Darkness for many years together. But the point being that I've been around a little while, but it's been fun. It's been a real blessing. I started as a hobby. I started for fun, and it turned into like my job for the last 13 years, or 12 years, last 12 years.
Yeah. Did you ever think it would go this long when you started it out as a hobby? Did you think, well, I'm going to be doing this for over a decade and it's going to be my full-time job, or did you think it would just stay a hobby?
I thought it was something I'd probably do for a few years. When I very first started, first of all, I never even considered any possibility that it would be a job because podcasting wasn't a money-making thing.
Right.
I mean, It was a hobby. It was like a bunch of hobbyists saying we want to play radio. And I'd had a broadcasting background and I went to school for it. And I actually worked at radio stations for years, but I worked on the business side.
Oh, yeah.
And I was frustrated that I didn't get to do this because it's kind of what I went to school for. So I thought, I'll do this as a hobby. And I love the paranormal since I was a little kid. So it was a natural fit. And I figured, hey, I'll do this 6 months. I'll interview these people. I'll have all this paranormal stuff figured out. Didn't work out that way.
It never does it?
Well, it's funny, Jim. You started in the era where podcast gets the name.
Yeah.
It was an iPod.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the very first iPod I had, I was like, what is a podcast?
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't know, about a dozen different things you could go and subscribe to, and they would download when you plugged in your iPod.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just like, this is really cool. I was already into audiobooks, and I thought, well, this is great. And I can remember coming across your show because it was probably around 2005 when I got my very first iPod.
Yeah, I think because I started in July 2005, and I think like Apple put podcasts into iTunes at the time, like just a few months earlier than that. Because really, I think the real first podcast started in 2004. And there were some paranormal podcasts before me, but they're no longer around. But that's a funny way I came up with the name because people say, oh my gosh, I'm an SEO guy. How'd you get the name Paranormal Podcast? Because nobody else was doing it hardly.
Mm-hmm.
And they always say, don't put podcast in the name of your podcast. But I'm like, hey, give me a break. It was the summer of 2005. We were making it up as we went along. So it's the Paranormal Podcast.
Yep. I mean, at the time, you had to label it that. Nowadays, everybody kind of knows that,
right.
Okay, this is a podcast.
They didn't know
These
what
are
a podcast was.
Right.
The funny thing that I think about it is back then people were like, you're starting a podcast? What cast? What are you talking about? A podcast.
Yeah.
It's like why would you do that? Nobody does those. Nobody listens to those. And now people are like, oh, you've got a podcast. So does my little 12-year-old niece. And he's like, why are you doing that? Everybody has a podcast.
Yep.
So, but it's been a blessing to me. It's been a great medium. I'm like you, Matt. I go back to actually before the iPod, it was a thing called an Arcos jukebox, and it had a whopping 5 gigabytes, and it was like you could use it as like a murder weapon if you wanted to. It was so heavy. And you had to have, I had this program, this was before iTunes had podcast. It was called Juice, I think was the name of it. And you would download podcast to that and then sync to your unit. Then within a few months, I got an iPod and I was off to the races. But yeah, now it's like with a smartphone, it's like boom, 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 done. Mm-hmm. Before you had to hook up the cables and sync and stuff. So people who say they were with me back then, I know they really enjoy the shows because it took a lot of work to get a podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Those are the OGs of
for sure.
podcasting. Now, with you doing it this long, I know Matt and I have experienced this, and we're nowhere near the length that you have. We started in 2017.
That's still a long time.
It feels like a long time now. But we see, a lot of skeptics who come into the paranormal to try to debunk things. And they're like, there is no way that your personal experience is true. You did not witness this. You did not see this. How has doing this and getting so many stories for so many years changed your opinion or your thoughts on people's personal experiences?
If anything, it's made me believe them more because I have so many people from so many different walks of life, different parts of the country, different parts of the world who will call in and have very similar experiences. And then somebody will call in and say, so-and-so called in and I thought, well, I was the only one that experienced this. So my approach has always been be very accepting. If you guys remember Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes, how he would like challenge people and you're like, did you really do what you said? That's never been my style for the Campfire show. I think the vast majority of people who call in are being truthful and they believe that they have experienced something potentially paranormal. And who am I to say that they haven't seen what they say that they've seen? That's something that sometimes annoys me about some skeptics. Now, they're very nice skeptics. I just did a show that I was invited on with a skeptic, and he was a skeptic, but he was a very good and reasonable guy. And those kind of people, I can say, hey, we can agree to disagree. I think that's something we need a lot more in this world. We're not all going to see eye to eye on stuff. But when people, as you said, Adam, when they come and said, you didn't see that, you couldn't see that, it kind of reminds me of something that happened with a former professor of mine. Because on my show, we do ghosts, cryptic creatures, UFOs. To me, paranormal encapsulates it all. So I had a professor, Dr. Robert Jacobs, and this was back in the early 90s, and he told us about a UFO story that he had witnessed while in the Air Force filming a military test. He had basically filmed something shooting a test missile out of the sky, and he was told to never speak of it again and all this stuff. Turns out, now he told us this story in 90 or 91 when I was in college. And then years later, he was on the old Larry King show, if you remember the Larry King show on CNN. Yeah. And he was on the panel telling his story. There was him. I think it might have been Robert Salas, who was another military person who experienced a UFO thing with missiles. And then there was Bill Nye the Science Guy. And Bill Nye the Science Guy started saying, well, it could be this, it could be that. He's like, remarkable claim, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And my old professor, and look for this on YouTube, he dressed down Bill Nye the Science Guy. He's like, look, pal, what do you do this with, vinegar and baking soda? And he said, look, I know what I saw. I saw something shoot the missile out of the sky going thousands of miles an hour. You tell me in the early 1960s, who had that technology? Did the Russians have it? Did the Chinese have it? Did we have it? No, we did not. You tell me. I was there. I know what happened. So don't tell me what I saw.
Right.
And I'm like, yay, Dr. Jacobs. Because, especially with something like that, that's very much in your face. Who are you to say, well, you're not telling the truth?
Mm-hmm.
And Nye said he wasn't calling him a liar, but he basically was calling him a liar.
Yeah.
In my view. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think we've got to give people some leeway. That doesn't mean every leaky faucet is really a ghost. Every time somebody walks into a place with a EMF meter and it goes crazy, if it's a 100-year-old house, well, yeah, that's got leaky electrical. So not every leaky faucet is a ghost. Right. But I think we have to be respectful of people's stories. And I believe the vast majority of them. And I think people are being very sincere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even if you can legitimately explain somebody's experience, it still happened to them.
Yes.
And they couldn't explain it at the time. And it just becomes one of those events in your life where you say, look, this happened to me. I don't really understand it. And it seems paranormal. It's out of the ordinary. We were never able to come to a resolution. And you just have to, you can see the truth in these people's faces when they're telling you this.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It reminds me of a story, because some of these stories, I basically say either the person is lying or making it up, or something possibly supernatural happened to them. Now, it may end up being scientifically based, but it might be the science of the 24th century. I'll give you an example, a real quick story from the new book. This is called The Mysterious Mrs. Raspberry, and this was Jennifer from, I think, Iowa or Idaho. I'm getting confused. But anyway, she was 8 or 9 years old. Her and her friends would go on these, her friend would go on these little adventures. And back in the day, in the 80s, kids would leave home in the morning and they would come home at dinner time. No cell phones, nothing like that. So her and her friend decided that they were going to trek down some abandoned railroad tracks that led to the lake, which was about like 4 miles away, which is a long walk. But they decided they were going to do it. So they left one morning and they went. And they're walking. They walk for about a mile, and it's very heavily forested. And then there's a clearing. And there's houses there. And there's a lady in what they used to call, older women used to wear house dresses. Mm. This woman was wearing a house dress, putting some laundry on the line. And there were a couple of raspberry bushes there. And the woman struck up a conversation with these two little girls. And they were talking. She was just as nice as she could be. And she said, hey, girls, we've got raspberries here. Would you like to have some? And the girls said, sure, we'd love to have some strawberries. So they held out their shirt and they used them like little baskets. Mm-hmm. And the woman put the raspberries in their shirts, and the girls ate the raspberries and stained their shirts. I'm sure their moms loved that.
Oh, yeah.
And they talked with her a little more, and then they went about their way, and they went down to the lake, which was their destination, and they had a good time for a few hours, and then they headed back. And they come back, and where this lady was with these houses and the clothesline and the raspberries, there's a clearing, but there's no houses. There's no raspberry bushes. There's no clothesline. And there's no lady.
Wow.
And this track is one way in, one way out. There's no crossing tracks or some way there's one way in, one way out. And Jennifer, being a very smart little girl, walks on home with her friend, and she asks her grandma, here's what happened. We walked for about a mile. We came to this area with the clearing, and there was this lady with the raspberries, and then we came back and it was gone. She said, are there houses over there? And her grandma said, yeah, there were houses over there. Those houses were there in the 1920s before they were torn down when they brought in the railroad. Now, you might think, oh, this is just a woman who had this memory as a little girl. Maybe it's something she saw on TV and she got confused, or maybe she dreamed it or something like that. But she knew she was going to come on the campfire. So shortly before that, she got in touch with her friend from that day. And she said, hey, this happened to us. Do you remember this the way I do? And she described the woman and the houses and the clothesline and the raspberries and going down to the lake and coming back and nothing being there. And her friend said, absolutely 100%. That's exactly what happened. So you tell me, if that's not supernatural / paranormal, whatever, I don't know what is. It's not a classic ghost story, but the raspberry lady is pretty much a ghost.
Yeah.
Now, is she a dead person? Is it a time slip? Is it an alternate universe? Your guess is as good as mine.
Mm-hmm.
But either Jennifer is making it up, which I don't believe she is, or she experienced something that the best word we have to describe it is supernatural. Maybe there'll be a better word in the future.
Yeah.
But I believe her 100%.
Yeah, that's wild. That when you said it, the first thing I thought was time slip, because we've looked into a couple of those, and it, like you said, there may be in the future a better way to describe it, where like there are small wormholes that pop up and you traverse through a wormhole into this alternate time, because we know time is not linear,
right?
So maybe you have moved into another time and then back out of this wormhole. And when we, maybe 100 years from now, 50 years from now, if we discover that there are transient wormholes, then it won't be supernatural anymore. And it'll just be,
right.
Oh, you fell into one of these wormholes that pop up randomly in our universe. But like you said, for now, we have to describe it as paranormal, supernatural, because that's the only word we have to describe it. The only way our brains can comprehend it right now.
Right. And doing this for almost 20 years, people say, well, what do you learn? What great mysteries have you figured out? And the answer is none. But the one thing, zero. In fact, I have more questions when I started. But what I will say is I think that I've got an appreciation for now that our existence is way more complex than we understand. Mm-hmm. For example, we didn't know about DNA and understand it in the last 50, 60 years. I mean, or really understood it. I mean, I think it was discovered before then. But it was always there. We just didn't know about it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, for example, right now, I could be in a room full of my dead relatives and I wouldn't know it. Mm-hmm. Kind of like you can't see ultraviolet light. My family could be right behind me right now, the ones that passed. Hi, Mom. No.
Yeah.
I keep pulling that trick on shows, and I think my mom's going to, one of these days, she's going to say, okay, you want to play? We'll play. And she'll be right there.
Yep.
But
you'll go to edit and there'll be a voice in that answering you one day.
Yeah. Yeah. So keep pulling that trick, Jim. But the point is that there's so much we don't understand. And I love science. I mean, for example, what we're doing right now used to have a satellite and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to do. And within the last 25 years, this has become available to the regular person. And we can do this from our home studios and basically do a broadcast. And that's because of science. But I think where science gets in trouble is science fails to, by science, I mean the scientific community, they fail to recognize their limits and that they don't know everything. I think years ago, Donald Rumsfeld said, former Secretary of Defense, said there are known knowns, things we know that we know. There are known unknowns, things that we know that we don't know, and then unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
Things we do not know that we do not know.
Yep.
And I think there are a lot of those unknown unknowns, things that we don't know, that we don't understand, and we don't know. I think sometimes science loses sight of that.
Yes.
And that we don't know everything, basically.
Well, just imagine if Thomas Edison came back today and saw what we have available to us. Yep. I mean, he would just be like, this was totally impossible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right there. Yeah.
Yep. The lights in my cabinet that I turn on with a
any
remote.
Sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah. Yep.
So
exactly.
there's so much we don't understand. So who am I so back to your question, Adam, who am I to say when somebody calls in that they're lying or making it up? For example, I had a guy years ago who called in and said, when I was a little kid, I would see a leprechaun. And the average person will say, you what are you smoking? But the point is who am I to say he didn't see something that presented itself as a leprechaun, or he was a child, and whatever this was, he perceived it in such a way that to him it appeared like a leprechaun. Now, kind of the twist to that is it bothered him for years. He's like, was I, something going on with me? Was I imagining things? Was I hallucinating? Finally, one day, he was having dinner with his brother, maybe 20, 30 years later, because this happened in the late 60s. And he was talking to his brother, and he said, I got to tell you something. I used to see the craziest thing when I was a kid. I used to, time after time, I saw a leprechaun. And not joking, his brother said, you saw him too?
Oh, wow.
So who am I to say? Maybe it wasn't actually a leprechaun, but it was something presenting itself in that way, or his mind interpreting in that way.
That's how he could, his child perception of it saw it as a leprechaun because it was a smaller being. And that was the only, looking back in his child Rolodex of thoughts and memories, that's the only thing he had was leprechaun.
Right. Reference point.
So, yeah.
It's interesting about that, Jim, because I used to live in a house in Hendersonville, which is about 10 minutes south of where I live now. And that's where I lived with my first wife. And we had 2 kids, 2 daughters who are now 22 and 18. And 15, 16 years ago, I used to see a little girl in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And she wore the little pinafore dress, and it was yellow, had the little ruffles around the skirt, looked, period-ish. And I'd never said anything about it. I kind of grew up with this. And so one day I asked my ex-wife, I said, I'm not trying to scare you, but do you ever see something? And her face just went white. And she said, yeah. And described exactly what I'd seen. And about a year or so ago, I was having a conversation with my oldest daughter, and she brought it up out of the blue. And she said, she was, Dad, we've seen this little girl at the house. And I said, really? She said, oh yeah. She's like, I don't know if you ever saw it, but, and she described the exact same little girl that I had seen 15 years ago.
Yep.
So it gives you a little bit of validity. It makes you think I'm not nuts.
Oh,
just
yeah.
like this guy, saying his brother saw the same thing and they just never said anything about it.
It reminds me a little of one of my family ghost stories. And I often wonder, between my family spooky stories, because there are a couple of great ones, I think, that they have, then Leonard Nimoy and In Search Of, and then Robert Stack and Unsolved Mysteries and Art Bell, and you mash all that together and you end up doing this for a living. And I only mean that in a good way. But it reminds me a little bit, it's a little twist of it, but the story happened to my dad. Now, my family was originally from West Virginia. So they moved up I'm in Cleveland, and they moved up in this area to work in the steel mills, like a lot of people from down south. And they lived, when they were first here, they lived, didn't have a lot of money and stuff. They lived up over a bar. And there was a little apartment they had. I think it was 2 rooms. And this had to be 1960, somewhere around in there. So anyway, two big guys, both they played high school football. My dad was 6 foot, my uncle 6'2", big, strong, young guys at that time in like their mid-20s. Wouldn't want to mess around with them necessarily. And they're each sleeping in bed in this little room. There's one door in, there's one door out. And all of a sudden, my dad wakes up and he sees like this older guy with the glasses leaning over him, smiling. Oh. And my dad, wham, tries to hit him. He hits air. Mm. Then he wham, tries to hit him, and he hits air. And he continues to do this and starts screaming and yelling. And my uncle's like, what in the beep, 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 beep are you doing? He's like, there's somebody in here, John. So they're looking around. And he's like, you had a damn old dream. So anyway. So my dad said, no, there was somebody in here. I saw him. He was looking at me and he was kind of like smiling and laughing at me. He's like, you had a dream. Go back to bed. About 3 weeks later. My dad's asleep. My uncle's asleep. All of a sudden, my dad hears a commotion in the other room. My uncle was asleep. He was 6'2", so he had more reach. And he looked up, and there was this old guy leaned over him, smiling. They're like, wham, he misses him, wham, he misses him, wham, he misses him. He's like, Jim, there's somebody in here. My dad, I'm a junior. He's a senior. Same thing. Saw the same guy. And they concluded it was like an older guy that used to go to that bar who had died.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that's the thing where somebody didn't believe somebody, but they found out. Now, the cool thing about it is my uncle, unfortunately, has passed. But the cool thing is my dad's still alive. He's 88 years old. Still sound. Knock on wood. Everything's good. He tells exactly the same story that he told for as long as I can remember, going back to the 1970s. Exactly the same story. It has not changed one bit. So maybe my interest in all this and my belief in people's stories came from stories like that. But it made me think it was a case where two different people in the same household saw something, but one person didn't believe the other person. And then he found out.
Yeah. Yeah. So that brings up a question. When you were saying your dad and uncle experienced it, do you think there's genetic factors or familial factors to paranormal witnesses? Like, do you think there's a genetic thing that says, oh, you're going to be more apt to see UFOs or see the paranormal, where maybe another family, not so much? Like Matt's family, very much in tune to the paranormal and have had a lot of experiences. My family, not so much. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm like one of the first ones in my family to have had an experience, or at least am willing to talk about it. You know, none of my others will talk about it. But do you think there's familial factors, or do you think it's just luck of the draw and whether you're willing to believe it or not?
I think everybody has some kind of psychic ability to some extent. We all get gut feelings. The example that I've heard many times, I believe this, there could be an argument in a room, but the argument's over, but you walk in the room and you feel that energy. I think that's part of it. Now, there's a difference though. Like I could take a basketball and I could throw it at a hoop and I might even get lucky and it might even go in. But nobody's going to mistake me for LeBron James. So I believe that in the supernatural, it's the same thing. I think that everybody has a certain amount of it. And this is based on many discussions. I've spoken to a lot of psychics, and my view on psychics is that there's some very good and legitimate ones. Then unfortunately, there's probably some bad apples. But when I've talked to them, I've asked much the same question. And basically what they tell me, and I believe this, it makes sense to me, is that everyone has some level of psychic ability, even if it's underdeveloped. That doesn't mean that you're going to be able to find missing people or things like that, but we all get hunches and those kind of things. But then there are people, and I think it does extend to families, who just seem to be more tuned in.
Mm-hmm.
And the way, and I just came up with the analogy the other day, and I think it's a really good one. You guys go back to the radio days, and you could buy like the cheap transistor radio that you get for $9.95, and it would pick up the big stations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But then you could get the GE Super Radio, and it would really tune in, and you could get those distant frequencies. Well, I think when it comes to psychic ability and the propensity to see paranormal things, I think some people are super radios, and they're more tuned in, and I do think it can run in families.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, if it was like a talent or anything else that you could pass on, then sure, why not?
Yeah.
I mean,
I do think it can be developed, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no. I agree with you wholeheartedly that I think it's something that, you might have a knack for it. You may have absolutely zero interest in it at all. In fact, you may even be aware of it and shun it. I've talked to people that are in that situation. They just it's against what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to focus on it. They're not going to discuss it. It's absolutely taboo. But if they decided to cultivate it, they might find that they're one of those super radios.
Yeah.
And they
totally
for whatever reason, they won't do it. It's like somebody that they may be a virtuoso with a musical instrument. If they've never picked one up, they're never going to know.
That's right.
They may not want to. They may not be interested. Their interests lie elsewhere. Whatever. I mean, I look at it as it could be essentially the same thing. A great musician may have, children that are extraordinarily talented musicians as well.
No, I think you're spot on there. I agree 100%.
So, we kind of teased to it a little bit, but you have several books out, and your newest one, at the time of recording this, it dropped just yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got a lot of cool stories in there, and you had mentioned that you could share one or two of them, and
yeah,
I think our listeners would enjoy that. And give them a little taste of what JimHarold puts out there in books.
Okay, well, I'll be glad to do that. Now, the raspberry story was from this book. Now, there was another story. I don't know if you all believe in curses, but there was this one, and you talked about people that don't believe in the paranormal. This plays into it too. Now, my wife's Italian. And the name of this story is the Malocchio, which is the evil eye. And we had a story from a gentleman from Chicago. His name's Eddie. And he was Sicilian American. And when he was 17, his folks took him to Sicily to meet family and stuff. It was kind of like a gift because he was going to be going to college and stuff. And the thing is that like when you talk about Italian witchcraft, his mom was not into it at all. She thought that the paranormal stuff was BS, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of like what you were talking about, Matt. Like, I don't play that stuff. The dad, on the other hand, his family was a little bit into it. They did like little things for protection and stuff. So they kind of bought into the whole kind of Italian, some people would call it superstition. And I'm familiar with that from my wife and her family. And their belief in things like the evil eye. So anyway, they're in Sicily. They're having a great time. They're getting ready to go out one day. And Eddie's grandmother had this neighbor who hated Eddie's family. It turns out that Eddie's dad had dated her daughter. And that didn't work out, obviously, because he married Eddie's mom. And then this woman would accuse Eddie's family of all kinds of stuff. So she didn't like him. So anyway, they were getting ready to go out. And this woman comes out and starts screaming at them in this Italian dialect. And throws a dead chicken at them.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, that got Adam's attention. Whoa, what was that?
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting dead chickens.
I was not.
So anyway, like Eddie couldn't understand what she's saying because she's talking in this wild dialect, screaming at them. And the mom said, oh, she just put the evil eye on us. But don't worry, we'll just say a quick prayer and that'll be it because their family was devout Catholic. So anyway, they finished up their trip. They went back home, and that's where everything went to hell. Usually the family never fought, right? Sisters got along perfectly. They got back home fighting like cats and dogs. There started to be random cold spots in the house, even though there were never cold spots before. There started to be random places in the house where there would be obnoxious smells and odors. House never smelled before. The mom and dad never screamed at each other. They were fighting like cats and dogs. Then, there's one night, Eddie's mom, who does not believe in the paranormal, is asleep. And she wakes up and she feels like somebody's watching her. Her husband, Eddie's dad, is asleep. She's trying to fall back asleep. She's like, I swear there's somebody in this room. She closes her eyes. All of a sudden, she feels an icy cold grip around her ankle, and something tries to pull her out of the bed.
Oh, no.
She's screaming. She's crying. She's freaking out. Wakes up the whole family. She's like, at first she thought it was her husband playing a trick. It wasn't. And she said, I'm not sleeping here. I'm going downstairs, which really kind of shook the kids because they knew she didn't believe in any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then a few nights later, Eddie is in his room. And he's feeling this presence in the room. And finally, he sees in the corner, there's kind of a shape. He says it's darker than dark, blacker than blacker, like a hole cut out of the universe. And there's something there. Tries to close his eyes. It comes closer, and he starts to hear it breathing and feel it breathing on him. And then he grabs a rosary that his family, put on the bedpost because they're Catholics. And he starts to say, I think it was the Lord's Prayer, which he knew since he was 5 years old, but he couldn't remember the words. He tries to get up, and his legs will barely move. He said they felt like metal. He finally pulls free and goes to his parents' room and tells them what happened. Said, look, we got to do something. There's something going on. Everybody's fighting. Mom's got something in the bedroom, pulling her out of bed. I've got this thing. Something's going on. Next day, they call the parish priest. He says a blessing, and that's the end of it. Now, Eddie was saying how much he appreciates the traditions of the old country of Sicily. But he says, in any culture, there are people who become so jealous that they will do whatever they can to get what they're jealous about from the person, or at least get revenge.
Right.
And that's what he thinks happened with the evil eye and that strange woman.
Wow. Yeah, that.
I tell you what, I made a joke of this to Amanda the other day, but I told her, I said, I had my evil eyes cleansed the other day, just in case. And she looked at me and I said, I'm serious.
Well, the funny thing was, I don't know. I did an interview with the great Richard Syrett, who does also Coast to Coast AM as a substitute host. He's great. And he was telling me about his wife's family, and they're Greek and they have the same beliefs. In fact, his mother-in-law had given him a little evil eye amulet that he kept in the studio, and he showed it to me right in the middle of the show to protect from the evil eye.
Yeah.
And it was pretty interesting, but people really believe in this. I mean, my father-in-law, who was Italian, he actually emigrated from Italy over here in the 1960s. He had like a horn that he would have on his mirror of his car that hung down that was supposed to be, you know, for protection. So it really is a thing. And there's an excellent, if anybody's interested in learning about the evil eye, there's a great book on it. The guy's name is Antonio Pagliarulo, I think is his name. The book is The Evil Eye, and it came out last year. He was a guest on the Paranormal Podcast. And just interesting stuff. And I believe, and we have some other curse stories in the book. I believe that that's a thing. And I believe in the power of positive thinking. I think if you're positive towards a person or towards a project, towards a job, that it tends to lead to better results. But I think it could work the other way too, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and most cultures and societies have something like the evil eye, from Italy. Now, that's the one that gets probably the most
press.
The most press, because it's on so many things, and it's the Italian evil eye is talked about so much. But I have family members from South America, from Colombia, and it's same thing there in South America. They have the curses and the protections against. And, Matt and I both wear black tourmaline and stuff just because of what we do. I have had a long bout with sleep paralysis where I would have sleep paralysis 2-3 times a week. Mm-hmm. And finally, one of our listeners sent me and Matt some black tourmaline. And so I did what I was supposed to do with it, kept it beside the bed when I went to sleep. I haven't had sleep paralysis since.
That's interesting.
So I will not go, whether it's psychosomatic or not, I will not go without my black tourmaline just because of that. Because the sleep paralysis was getting rough for a while, seeing entities in my room. And I had entities in the bed with me. I was a single man at the time and lived alone, and there was entities. I'd wake up, not be able to move, and there's something sitting in the bed with me. After the black tourmaline, it hadn't happened since. So,
and sleep paralysis is a tough one, because I believe in some cases, not necessarily all cases, that there can be a medical explanation for that. But I also believe that there can be a paranormal explanation for it too. So that's a really tough one when somebody calls in and they say something that they had sleep paralysis. It's like, is it apnea or is it something? It sounds like in your case, it definitely was not medical because nothing changed medically.
Right. And that's the thing that got me, is because I had heard the medical explanations for it. And I thought, well, maybe that's it. Maybe it's I'm partially waking up and I still have the chemicals flooding through my body that are keeping me paralyzed.
Right.
Whatever. But there was other stuff that I was seeing going through that. And then I just, on a whim, thought, okay, I will try this black tourmaline. Mm-hmm. It was sent to us. I'm not out anything. I might as well try it. And when that fixed it and it went away, I was like, okay. I put more stock into it.
Yeah.
So that I brought all that up because of the evil eye and then the amulets and stuff to protect against it. And I don't know, like, I'm on the fence. I don't know how you are, but I'm on the fence with the crystals and stuff. You in the paranormal realm, you run across people saying, well, this type of stone or crystal causes this effect and everything. And I find myself still, after everything, going, but really, does it?
Go ahead, man. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. There were, when we first got that, a listener sent that to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I was researching it. I didn't know much about it. And I came across a really interesting story about a fella that was having nightmares, like really bad nightmares. And it was getting to the point where he was almost dreading going to sleep. And someone gifted him a piece of black tourmaline and said, put this on your nightstand and the dream should get better because this absorbs negative energy. And sure enough, he did it, and the dream started to subside and eventually went away. Now, weeks after this, he was having some repair work done on his house, and he learned that his AC unit sat right outside, and the wiring went right under his bed, essentially.
Oh.
And they told him, you've got some unshielded wires down here we need to fix, or it could cause a fire. So this guy was essentially going to bed every night, sleeping in this electromagnetic field.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so you say, okay, so that explains maybe why he was having the nightmares. But does it explain why the black tourmaline took it away if it was absorbing that kind of energy? And of course, what do all these ghost hunters use when they go? An EMF meter. So it's curious if it would work with, a natural known source of an electromagnetic field. Why wouldn't it work with any electromagnetic field? And so I thought, okay, we're going to do this. And I started using mine because we were seeing shadow figures in our house. And I said, we're gonna start sleeping with this right beside us. Sure enough, hadn't had one since. My dad came to me, and my dad is a pretty serious fella. So when he brought this to my attention, I knew he's seeing something.
Yeah.
And gave him some, and he carried his around in his pocket, and he said, I hadn't seen anything since you gave me this.
I like it. And a couple things. I dropped one on the floor there. You probably heard it, but I have some crystals by my desk. I don't even know what that is, but I thought it looked cool. But I've done some shows on crystals. I think it's interesting. I won't reject it. I don't know if I fully believe in it for myself, but I actually have a bunch of neat ones that I misplaced when we moved about 3 years ago. I still want to find those. It's driving me crazy. But the thing I was going to say, and you talked about dreams, and kind of like sleep paralysis, dreams are tough, right? Because there's dreams that are just like because you ate something that's bad. You go to, or it's like your mind trying to file stuff so you'll go to the grocery store and you're go to the produce department, then you have a dream that you're flying on a head of cabbage that night.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then again, I think that sometimes, I definitely think it's all physiological in some cases, but I do think something about that sleep state and about that dream state makes you more susceptible to the paranormal. It could be spooky stuff like the things we're talking about here, or it can be visitations from past loved ones, messages. People have described to me, I saw my mom, I saw my dad. It was more real than real. And I believe that happens. I believe that 110%.
Yep. We've gotten, every year around Christmas, we try to bring back that Victorian tradition of telling ghost stories around the campfire. And so we have listeners send in their personal stories. And I can't tell you how many we've seen that somebody says, I had a loved one pass away and they have visited me in my dreams. And I know it's not just me dreaming about them.
Right.
And, Matt and I are 100% on board with, in that state, you don't have your everyday walls up. Because when
you don't have your guard up.
Right. When you become an adult, you put up these guards. Well, I can't believe this. I have to believe this. This is the way life is. This is what we do. But in that dream state, you don't have those walls up. So they have more access to you. And I completely believe they will visit you sometimes just to let you know things are okay. You're worrying about me. Here I am. I'm all good.
And the thing that I was thinking about it, something important I think is about the Campfire, whether it's the books or the show, and shows like yours too, of course, and all the paranormal shows out there, is to normalize this. Just because I believe in ghosts and I believe, there's something to the UFO phenomena and possibly cryptids, although sometimes I could be a little skeptical on that. I can do that and still be a functioning member of society. It doesn't mean that I still look out here and I see I need to cut my grass and it'll get cut in the next couple of days. I mean, you still, and there's this perception, I think, that if you believe in this kind of stuff, that there's something wrong with you or not. I'll give you an example. I used to work, I worked for a number of different radio stations and radio groups. I worked for CBS Radio for a while. And at one point I worked for a classical music station, very well respected and, all la-di-da and stuff. And I was called for jury duty. This was like 2006. And before I was podcasting, but it was just a hobby at that point. I just started. So anyway, I went in, sat for the jury to be selected, and they said, juror number 17, what do you do for a living? Well, I work for such and such classical radio station. And they're like, well, you can be seated on the jury. And I ended up serving for a week, and it was interesting. I was glad I did it once. That was good, once. A few years later, I get called up, and it's 2013, 2014, probably 2014, 2015. And by that point, I was podcasting full time. And I thought, there's a little bit of bias out there. Let's see if I can use it to my advantage. So juror number 17, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm glad you asked. Things like ghosts and Bigfoot and UFOs. Well, I sit in a room and do like kind of internet radio shows on that all day long. And that's how I make my living. And they said, juror number 17, thank you for coming in today. You are excused.
That's it.
Yep.
But it's sad in this case, I was kind of glad, obviously, but it's kind of sad because I think even the skeptics in their heart of hearts, 3:00 in the morning when they can't sleep, they're going, is there really something to this? Is there really something going on?
Yep.
Don't tell anybody, but I'm wondering, do we live beyond this? And then there's the skeptic who says, I don't believe in any of this stuff. Now, there was this one time.
Yeah.
And then they tell you their story, which is like the craziest paranormal story.
Yeah.
So I love what I do. I love sharing the stories, and whether people check out the podcast, Jim Harold's Campfire, and if they haven't heard of it, I hope they check it out, or the books. And you can read them in any order, and they're Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and at JimHarold.com. I hope everybody at least gives them a try and sees what they think.
Yep. And that you bringing that up, that's good. I know I will put in the description of the episode where they can find you, but you said Amazon for the books, and then your website.
BarnesandNoble.com.
Okay, BarnesandNoble.com.
Yeah, all the usual online places, and we're even doing some copies, autograph copies too of the print, because it's in print and ebook. And all the links, you go to JimHarold.com. It's spelled just like my name is there, JimHarold.com. It's a big green button at the top of the website, so it's really easy to find.
Perfect.
Yeah, I found it with no problem. So if I can find it, anybody can.
That's a valid point. If Matt can work the internet, you can too.
I think you're underestimating yourself.
But Jim, thank you so much for coming on the episode and for sharing some of the stories out of your book there, and for discussing the weirdness with us. We appreciate that.
That's my favorite thing to do, and it's been a lot of fun, Adam and Matt, and you've been great, and I've had a great time, and love to come back anytime, and thank you so much, and continued success with your show.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have you back on for a specific topic maybe one day, and we'll dive deep into that specific topic.
Sounds good. Thanks again. Everybody stay spooky.
Yes.
Thanks, Jim. All right. Once again, we want to thank Jim Harold for coming on the show. He as Adam said at the beginning, this has been a long time coming. we've wanted to have Jim on for quite some time, and we're honored that he came on tonight. If you're that kind of person that likes to curl up with a book, especially one full of really good ghost stories, check out Jim's book series. His newest one is True Ghost Stories. It's number 6 in the series. And as he says, you can pick them up in any order. You're not following a plot. You're getting a collection of some people's true ghost stories, their experiences that they have shared with Jim, and he has put all those together. So, for those dark and stormy nights, there's really, really nothing better than just settling in with a good book. And
it's true.
The True Ghost Stories, the JimHarold, it's excellent to grab. Don't forget to go and check out our website. It is graveyardpodcast.com. There you can find links to purchase Graveyard Tales merchandise. You can listen to the show. And as Adam said at the beginning, you can become a patron. And for those of you that have been thinking about it, now's a great time. You get video versions of the show. You get bonus episodes. And for our $10 folks, you get access to our new show, Side Quest, which it's a whole different venue for Adam and me. We, as Adam said, it's a new realm. So go and check that out. Don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes. It brings us up the chart, and it makes it easier for people to find the show. So thanks again to JimHarold for joining us tonight. And until next time, we'll save you a seat in the graveyard.
See you soon.